Welcome to the Noizze Podcast Network, sponsored by Satanic Tico and brought to you as part of the Noizze Podcast Network. You're about to hear Will's in-depth conversation with Vicky Psarakis of Sicksense. This deep dive gave Vicky and Will a chance to discuss her musical journey, her gateway into music, falling into something she was good at, her natural vocal ability and talent, fulfilment in songwriting and potential, breaking into heavy music as a woman, her own perfectionism and battling with that throughout her career, and even building a community through streaming. And there's loads more. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at Noizze Podcast and follow us on Instagram at Noizze Podcast Network. The main site can be found on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter at Noizze UK. Like and subscribe on YouTube and be sure to listen wherever you get your podcasts, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If you fancy checking out our Spotify Essentials playlist or want to buy some merch, links are in the bio. And if you are feeling extra kind, drop us a review on the platform of your choice. It all helps more than you think. Enjoy the episode.
Well, again, thanks so much for joining us on the Noizze Podcast. So the first question really is just, how are you? How are you doing?
I'm good. I never know how to answer that because no one's ever like, yeah, everything's fine, like I feel like most musicians or most artists, there's like a million things going on in our head and we're always battling with like, this is great, but this sucks, and like, how are you? And everyone's just, yeah, I'm good. you know, just the stereotypical, but things are all right. Things are all right, taking it day by day and just doing the thing we love, I guess.
Yeah. So the reason that we're doing this today is because a little while ago on Twitter, you said that you wanted to be on some podcasts and talk about your musical journey. And obviously, I reached out and said, well, I think this would be great to talk about because you've got a really interesting journey. And I think you've had a very quite convoluted one at times, I think, where things have kind of changed, including you've moved countries a couple times for art,
Yeah.
for the sake of art. But I think the first thing to do is like rewind all of that to the very kind of beginning and just sort of ask, what was your gateway to music, I guess, first of all?
hmm
And then from there, when did you realize this is for me, this is what I want to do. I want to be doing this.
Yeah. Uh, okay. I mean, music is just one of those things that I was always I wasn't surrounded by it. Like my family isn't a musical family. Nobody that I know of can sing, can even carry a tune. But I was just one of those kids that could sing on pitch. And when you're doing a school play, you're in elementary school and you're looking at the kids that are 5, 6, 7 years old. Like it's really important to find kids that can sing in key. And so it was just something I was always like just thrown into, like whether I wanted to or not, because who knows what they want to do in life at that age. So it was just something that I was doing, and I didn't necessarily care for it. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it. I've always, I went through one phase of my life where I would not shut up when I was really young. But I don't remember this. My parents told me this. But after that point, I became this like shy, introverted kid. And that's basically who I've been my entire life until I had to step out of that, because of what I do for a living. So yeah, I would do this and I didn't particularly enjoy it because it was like, here you are in front of like 300 or more people singing. And but I was good at it, so I was like, whatever. Like I had a hard time saying no, so I would just do it anyways. And it wasn't until much later, like I want to say my teenage years, where I sort of started falling in love with music. Like I always enjoyed music, but it just never kind of sparked that fire inside me to be like, this is what I want to do for a living. That only happened when like I discovered particular bands and particular songs that had this thing that made me want to play it like on repeat over and over and over again. And even at that point, I didn't know that I wanted to do it. I just knew that I loved music. And that sort of like, it wasn't one day. It wasn't one day I just woke up and I said, "Hey, I'm going to be a musician." It was just I kept singing along to the stuff I liked, and then I had friends that were like, "Hey, you have a good voice. Have you considered, being a singer?" And I didn't care too much for it. I feel like I skipped so many steps, but um, I didn't care too much to be a vocalist or to be a singer. It was just something I was very good at, and I felt like people should do the things that they're good at. You know what I mean? Um, like I've met people that are passionate about singing and they can't sing, but they love singing. And like they'll sing in their shower and they'll sing at home and they love singing, and I'm like I don't have that. I just happen to be good at it. And I feel like if I'm good at something, I should do it because it's like your calling, so to speak. So yeah, I went from like my childhood all the way to like my adult life here in like 2 minutes, but basically it wasn't one day that I just woke up. It was a gradual sort of process, and it was just me feeling like I was stepping into a role that was designed for me. Does that make sense?
It does. No, it's interesting to hear you say it as like, because you obviously get the stories of, oh, I from the moment I picked up a couple of old paintbrushes and found a tub, I was going to be a drummer, and
Yeah.
it's I instantly knew that I wanted to make loud, obnoxious noises in a pattern.
Right. Right. Yeah, see, it's none of that for me. I would say that I have my moments that I can like recall where I was younger, where like music captivated me and the idea of creating music. But as a vocalist, I feel like I just fell into that and it was comfortable because it felt like, well, I'm already kind of good at this. Whereas like nobody picks up a guitar or sits at a piano and they're like automatically good. There's a learning curve. With singing, like skip a few steps. Like if you can already sing, like not everyone has the same sort of starting point, because like there's the pitch and the key and the range that you naturally have, but then there's like the mechanics of it, which with some people it comes a little bit more intuitively than others. So your starting point could be well like past someone else's starting point, and that's where you get comfortable and you're like, I'll just do this because I'm already kind of good. um and truth be told, like if I could go back, like I mean I wouldn't change the past because I wouldn't be who I am today. But if there is something that I wish I could do today, I wish I were like a multi-instrumentalist. I wish I had the same sort of technical proficiency that I have with singing in other instruments, which I don't. I can kind of play piano a little bit. I know my music theory, but I'm not I can't write an entire album myself. But that's okay. I just have to find other people that can do that.
Yeah, I was going to say it's, you're saying that as you're sat next to a piano, and I'm like,
Mm.
well, keyboard.
Yeah. I'm also like super like hard on myself, and like I don't recognize sometimes like some of the things that I do that as being maybe like out of the ordinary, for lack of a better word or term. Because like I feel like a lot of my journey in music has always been intuitive, and it's never like I took the steps on my own to learn some basic music theory, but a lot of the stuff that I started doing at a young age just kind of happened. Like when you sit at a piano and you put your fingers on piano, there's like there's a placement, there's a proper way to play certain scales and play certain melodies that's more comfortable for your fingers and can help you execute that melody in a way that's like you're not working twice as hard. And that's an example of something that comes intuitively. Like I've seen other people that don't play piano, they sit at the piano and they're positioning their fingers in a weird way. I'm like, why are you doing that? Like that you're making your life so hard. Just like play the sequence this way. And that was just something that like I just did. Nobody ever showed me. And I wasn't perfect at it, but it's one of those mysteries of in life sometimes where you sit and you think that like how did this come to me? Like how what is it inside me that made me good at this, you know? And I think that's where like pure raw talent comes from, that some people are just born with a talent for certain things. And while it's not the be all end all in your musical career, it is something that I think you can't succeed without.
For sure. I mean, like you say, it's something that's going to put you a couple steps ahead of the
Yeah.
person who's in, and this isn't disrespectful. It's if someone is a less talented singer or a less talented pianist, they're they're starting a couple steps back from you. And
Yeah.
you've had that, I guess, natural advantage to say you're already at this point.
Yeah.
And now it's kind of like, well, I may as well put the work in, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like talent will only get you so far. At the end of the day, the most successful people in this industry are the ones that put in the work day in, day out. They stay consistent. I've seen people rise to fame, and like if you just like tear down all the hard work and like all the visuals and everything that surrounds their music or what they do, they're not the most talented people to begin with. But at the end of the day, you'd rather be with people like that than people that are just super talented, but they're not willing to put in the work because they have this belief that the world owes them something, and it's you're never going to go anywhere in life with that way of thinking. So I think that the perfect combination is having that talent and making sure you do something with it.
Yeah.
And I feel like I sort of my journey was more of a passive one. I fell into the role that I fell into. Um but like essentially I've like my calling has always been to be like a songwriter, and I just happened to be good at singing, so I fell into that, but I never lost touch with like being a writer, like writing my own lyrics, writing my own melodies, sometimes writing my own piano parts. That's something that's always been important to me with everything that I've done. I don't think I could ever be in an original band, like a musical project, and just take other people's words and other people's melodies and just sing them, because that to me isn't exciting. And I know a lot of like amazing singers that they don't write, but they're excellent at taking a melody and like transforming it and like giving the emotion that it deserves and making you feel something. And to an extent, I think I could do that too, because like I've done a lot of covers, but it just wouldn't fulfill me to be always singing someone else's words.
Yeah. Coming on to you mentioning covers, so my, I guess, probably limited understanding, is that you've done a lot of covers, and that is partly because I mean, were you in any sort of like, I guess, bands prior
Yeah.
to obviously you obviously now most recent projects with the Agonist and now Sicksense? Were you in
Yeah.
bands prior? Yeah.
Yeah, so I did a few things, but nothing had that prospect like in my head that this would actually go somewhere. And this goes back to the thing that I was talking about, that like hard work and consistency are the number one contributing factors to something being successful. And when I say successful, I don't mean it's skyrocketing and like becoming viral and the thing that everyone's talking about. Every person measures success differently, but to me, success is like moving the needle forward with every single thing that you do, seeing that growth and seeing that progress and seeing something come out of it. If you're just staying stagnant, then this is going nowhere. So I feel like I had that mentality, and this is a business mindset, and I've had that pretty much all my life. I think I got that from my dad. I don't know, because he's self-employed. Well, now he's retired, but started his own business, well, multiple businesses, and he went through the phases of like starting a business and it failed and then move on to the next one, because it's like your life is never going to be um if you picture a growth chart, it's never going to like always go up. It's going to be like the stock market. It's gonna be volatile, up and down, and you just have to kind of make sure that you put your efforts into something that could potentially really grow. So I always had that um intuitively, I guess. Like I was always pretty good with money. I was good with math and stuff like that. And which is again what brings me back to singing, where it's like I didn't, if I weren't good at it, I wouldn't do it because there's other things that I'm good at too. So I would just like I'd rather be a person that focuses on stuff I'm good at. So going back to like starting my own journey with music, the moment I decided to take it a little bit more seriously, so this takes me back a little bit. I was up until that point I was singing like as a hobby. I was just like playing my favorite songs and singing along to it, and like it was a hobby. And I remember at some point I was like around the age of 18 or 19, and I was going through a really tough phase in my life at that time. I had received some like really bad news to the point of like I was experiencing like pure sadness for the first time in my life. And you know, when you're young, when you have a pretty okay childhood, you don't know what these things feel like. Like I lost a grandparent when I was 6 years old. So I, while I had like some experience with grief, I was so young that I didn't really understand what it was to like lose someone. So I think I had a pretty good childhood. Like my parents sheltered me from bad stuff in life, and like but raised me well enough to like be a responsible person. But I'd never really experienced something like truly sad and like traumatic. So like when that happened to me for the first time, I didn't really know how to react to it. And um I like completely shut down. Like I stayed in, I wasn't talking to anyone, I wasn't eating. It got to a point where like 3 days later I was brushing my hair, and like most of my hair was like on the hairbrush. And this was just because like I wasn't eating, and I'm a person that likes food, I eat. So my body didn't know how to respond to that. And nothing that I did, like I was listening to music, I was watching TV, nothing that I was doing was really helping me in any way. And what eventually did it for me, I remember this like super vividly. It was like 2006 or 7, I can't remember the year. I think 2006. And I had not this great keyboard here, but I had like the old school like 5 octave. It was like a Yamaha. It was like my first keyboard, $200. You know, doesn't even connect to a computer. And I sat down and I just started like playing some stuff and like singing along to it. And I'm like, oh, this is a pretty cool melody. So I would go from my keyboard to my laptop, which at the time I had Guitar Pro software, because that's what my friend said, like, download this, you know, and you can write your own music. And I knew nothing about music at the time. So I would sing a melody and I would kind of find the notes with a mouse, and it took me all day to write a song that I was hearing in my head. And you know, this song is probably garbage right now by my standards, but in that moment I was like, wow, I wrote my first song, you know. And it had no vocals, no lyrics. It was just like an instrumental piece, like kind of sounded like something you'd hear in a movie or a video game. But I did that, and then I feel like everything I was feeling, I put that in the music, and then that was what made me feel better. Like I woke up the next day and I felt like I was going back to normal. And I think that's what did it for me, that like as much as I love music and I love listening to music and like all the emotions it creates, the true thing that I love about music is creating it. And that was, I guess, the moment where I was like, this is what I have to do. So I started taking the steps in that, down that path, you know, of like, okay, I found my calling, so to speak, but I can't do it alone. Like, I don't play drums, I don't play guitar, I barely know what I'm doing when it comes to playing piano. my voice at the time was not at all developed. It was just like raw talent. And I was just trying to find other like-minded people to maybe start something together. And I did a lot of different things, like a lot of projects that started where we just did like one or two songs together and then ended because everyone has a life and nobody's willing to like make this a priority. And then I also experienced a lot of the obstacles that you still face in like 2023, but you faced it a lot more back then, being like a woman in a heavier music, not as like, I'm talking about so many different things here, but not as like a fan of music. Cause like women experience this a little bit as a fan of music where it's like, oh, you're just here because your boyfriend listens to metal or whatever. That's fine. You shrug that off, you laugh. But like
Mm.
experiencing it from a creator perspective is a whole other thing, because it's like people think of women, they think of them as like singers very often. They're like, oh, you're just a singer. You don't know music. You don't know anything about music. And, I would try to be in a band with people where it's like me saying to like the guitar player, for example, like, hey, your guitar is off, instead of that person just being like, oh, you know what? You're right. Let me, plug in my tuner and check it. Like his ego would be bruised and he'd be like, well, what do you know? You don't even play guitar. And I'm like, I don't need to play an instrument to tell you that you're off. Like I have a really good ear naturally. And
Yeah.
I
I
just
can tell you're
found,
out of tune, dude. It's like,
yeah. Yeah. Like, and that's not gender driven. It's not like men
no.
have better ears. So I just feel like status is a really important thing to begin with. Like, I know now if I were to do that, nobody would give me that attitude. Nobody would dare. Because times have changed and also I have a certain like status to my name. But back then it was just like it was really hard for people to see the potential in what I was doing and where I could go. And I knew it in me. I couldn't tell you exactly where I'd be 10, 15 years later, but I knew I had something different than most people around me. And I knew a lot of like musicians that were technically very, very good. Like they could play circles around me, but they couldn't create anything from scratch. Or like when they tried to create something from scratch, it just sounded like this generic cookie cutter. Like I've heard this riff a million times. I've heard this melody or these words a million times. So, not to like look down on anyone, but like I do believe that like people are equals as people, as human beings. We're all people. But at the end of the day, it's like some musicians just have that special sort of it factor and some don't. And it was hard for me for people to see that in me at the time, but it was also hard for me to find other people like that, because I would find other musicians that like had that, but then they lacked in like the business mindset, and they lacked in like understanding that no matter how talented they are, it doesn't fucking matter. At the end of the day, you got to put in the work as if you're not talented. And they weren't willing to do that. So it's like they were their own worst enemy. Um, and I went through a bunch of musicians, and I went through I was like, let me try and find a band that already exists, and just audition and become the vocalist. Like screw it, because like trying to build something from scratch is too hard. Um, but even that didn't work out, because the only bands that existed at the time in metal that like wanted a female voice were in like that symphonic metal
Yeah.
style, trying to be like Nightwish at the time. And I never cared for that in my musical tastes, and I didn't want to sing that way. And on top of like me not really wanting it, I did give it a shot, and people didn't like me. Like I've heard no many times in my life. And I think for many reasons that have nothing to do with like my voice. Like one person literally told me, this was a drummer, that if I lost 20 pounds, I would make it in this industry. And pretty much weighed what I weigh today. But it was okay back in 2008 or 2009 to tell women this.
Mm.
And I don't think he plays drums anymore. I don't think he's doing music. So um my point is I dealt with a lot of that. So dealing with all this, it just drove me to the point where I'm like, this isn't working. Um Everyone that I'm meeting just doesn't get it, or they just don't have the mindset to like build themselves outside of the local scene and like actually do something great. So how do I get a wider audience? How do I get, the possibility of getting discovered? And that's when I turned to covers. And that's when I started, because YouTube was like the new big thing where it's like, oh, I can with my webcam, it was way shittier back then, just like record a cover at home and put it on the internet, and people from all over the world can find me. And like that was exciting. Like people now are spoiled, back
Yeah.
then it
I
was
mean,
like, whoa.
yeah, people are still discovering vocalists that way now,
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
so yeah, back then it was like YouTube was all the rage, and it was
Yeah.
you're right. Like obviously, if a
Yeah.
band is going, we need a singer,
Mm.
and there's nobody on the local scene,
Yeah.
YouTube was the first place you would turn it. Like I say, it still
Yeah.
is.
It still is, except now it's like normal. Back then you were
Yeah,
like, it was still like unreal. Like, what do you mean? Like this is a thing? And I feel like I was one of the first, not one of the first, but like let's just say that if I hadn't found a band and I just kept doing the YouTube thing, I'd probably be like a YouTube famous person at this point instead of being like known mostly as like an original songwriter and vocalist. I really do think that like because it was in 2014 that like the Agonist discovered me, and I was only doing YouTube for like maybe 2 or 3 years at the time. So like I really think had that moment not happened, I just continued the YouTube thing, I'd probably be like one of those people that was like a YouTube musician, which is fine. It's just it would have been a different career choice, but
yeah. I think you were
um
getting into it at the right time to make
yeah,
a career of it as a YouTuber.
yeah.
Should that have been in the cards?
Exactly. Yeah. And but thankfully it's like I did a few covers, and what I was hoping might happen happened like sooner than I thought it would. And it was just really a no-brainer for me because like while I do enjoy doing covers, and I do think that like certain covers have helped me shape my voice in a way that I wanted to, and still to this day like I love doing covers because like I see the challenge and I see the sort of importance of like being able to sing something that you didn't write, because sometimes like that can be too comfortable too when you're just only singing your own songs. So I still enjoy doing covers for those reasons, but I never wanted to be known as a cover artist. So everything, I think I played my cards right in a way where it's like I did something that wasn't necessarily the thing that I wanted to do, but it brought me to where I wanted to be.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like you say, there are things that you wouldn't change, right? Because it gets you to the point you're at. You kind of take the steps you have to take.
Yeah.
And when you're seeing this nascent YouTube that's like, I can put myself out to the entire internet, which at that time was probably still millions of people,
Yeah.
as opposed to the billions now, which,
Yeah.
you could risk getting drowned out. So
Yeah.
you were discovered by the Agonist in 2014, you say,
Yeah.
and you moved country at that point when you joined.
Yeah. Yeah. So like we really like skipped a lot of steps here, but like I've moved a lot in my life. Like I was born in Chicago, but my parents are Greek, so like we moved to Greece when I was 10 years old, and we moved to this like small town, my dad's hometown, which is like 10 to 15,000 people. There was like me and maybe three other kids that listened to heavier music. And when I say heavier music, like Iron Maiden, Metallica, like nobody knew about any like hidden gems or stuff like that. It was like that was pretty much it. And I then decided when I was 18 I was going to like go to like the big city in Greece, Athens, Greece, which has like 5 million people, because back then if you wanted to do something in music, you had to like look local. Like YouTube wasn't a thing yet, or the idea of like writing music with people through a computer wasn't a thing. So um I was willing to do that, and I went there, and then I met some people I even moved to like Romania for like 2 years in between all this because I for a minute I thought I wanted to like go into the conservatory of music there, because it's like amazing education. Like I walked into a class, my first year being there, just to see what it was like. And it was like a choir class where there weren't any singers there. It was just like musicians, like guitar players, piano players, violinists, whatever. All the musicians of this classical conservatory. And they were singing in choir, and they all just had like their sheet music, and they were just singing their melody, and it just sounded so good. And I was like, wow, there aren't any singers in here, but this sounds so good. How is this possible? And it's just like that higher form of education where it's like, well, that's not what I wanted to do in my life. I couldn't help but respect it, you know.
Yeah,
And so I thought for a minute like maybe I should do this, maybe I should get my degree, and that would have been cool, but like at the end of the day I decided that like I don't really want to become a classical singer. Like opera's cool and all, but like that's not going to help move the needle towards like the goal that I want in life. And then I would just get this like diploma and hang it on a wall and teach in the future, but like I didn't want to teach, I wanted to do. So and then I moved back to Greece, and then the sort of thing started happening with the Agonist, and like me being American already just made it that much easier, where it's like I have family in Chicago, so it was like, well, let me move to Canada and then I can move to Chicago, and then I could just go back and forth between the two. And yeah, physical location never really meant anything to me. Like I
yeah,
think I have friends from like 10, 15 years ago that like don't talk to regularly, but like I still care about them, and I'll still like if they wanted to talk any day, I'd be like, yeah, let's talk, you know, cuz like I never had attachments to like physical places more so than like I would say I have like deeper connections with people and not places, if that
for
makes
sure.
sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. So coming on to kind of your time with the Agonist, you mentioned before, so that was your obviously you've done the covers, you had done bands before, but this was then in terms of your development as a musician, in terms of like your journey, this was the first time you did harsh vocals in
Yeah.
original material, you said.
Yeah, I had only been trying or like attempting to scream for like maybe 6 months before I got noticed by them. And the thing with the Agonist is that at the time, well, first of all, they're a band that like always kind of changed their sound from album to album. And what happened was, I didn't know this at the time, but they had already written probably the majority of the music for their upcoming album, I Have Providence. And I guess they knew where they wanted to go musically with that. And they wanted to go in a more, like in a direction that involved more so singing rather than screaming. So they wanted to like lessen that intensity, but not completely remove it. So they were looking for a vocalist, of course, that could do the harsh stuff, but their primary focus was like, we want to get a really good singer.
Yeah,
And I think that's why they were willing to sort of gamble on me, because it's like I wasn't at all good at screaming at the time. I think by the time we recorded I Have Providence, I had, made some steps and like was sounding decent enough for like a record. But like where I was in terms of like singing, it just couldn't compete. Like I was a lot more developed in my singing and like the versatility within that. And I think that's why they decided to go with me instead of, finding some other person that like can scream really well, but maybe like their singing tone is more monotone, like not as developed. Like they were looking to go in a more singing direction. So I think that's why I got the gig.
yeah. With that, I mean, it's not funny, I guess, to hear you say that now, but it is interesting given that then over the next two albums following that and subsequent EP,
Yeah.
it developed not necessarily back, because it
Yeah.
still progressed, right? But it did get a lot heavier and darker and more technical, and your
Yeah.
screaming 100% improved with it, you know?
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say, like you say, you
Yeah.
were at the point with Eye of Providence where it was, I can record, you know? I can
Yeah.
record this, I can record the parts for
Yeah.
the screams. But when it came to Orphans and then the Days Before the World Wept, like your screams had gotten a lot more developed because,
Yeah.
like, as you've already said, the point is to move the needle and improve yourself. You
Yeah.
know, you don't want to write Eye of Providence 2.0. You want to be at a point where you're like, my vocals are better now. I'm a better
Mhm.
songwriter.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, sorry, go
Mhm.
on.
No, I was just gonna say that like the Agonist was always that type of band where it's just like the songs that they were writing, primarily Danny, he's the main songwriter, but what he was feeling in that moment, what he was writing, he just put on his like that's how he wrote his songs. He didn't ever like I don't think ever like sit there beforehand and be like I want to write a song like this. It was just like what came from his heart in that moment. And it makes sense that like I can think of a lot of bands that did that where it's like they go in waves, like some albums are softer and then they'll do a heavier album, then they'll do another softer album. And I think while fans have difficulty sometimes accepting that because they want their favorite band to sound like their favorite album all the time, I think it's important as an artist to do that because, like, especially a diverse artist, like knowing all the different like things that I can do now with my voice, it would be incredibly boring to keep utilizing just that one vocal technique over and over again. So I think the Agonist was always a band that did that even before me, where it's like what we're feeling right now, this is what we're putting on the album, and we don't really care what the fans are gonna think, what the label's gonna think. Like this is what we want to do. And I went along with that. Like I was like, okay, we're writing heavier songs now. Fine, okay, cool, I can do that. Because my role always came in afterwards. Like here are the
Mm.
songs. This is what I have to work with. If a song is intense, I'll match that intensity. But if a song is softer, I'm not gonna go growl all over it. Like it. I work with what I'm given. So I think, yeah, I think the Agonist went back to its roots sort of towards the end there, and I'm happy that it did because I think like the last EP we did like is without a doubt I think the best material the Agonist has ever written. A lot of people would agree. So yeah. Mm.
A lot of people would be right.
Yeah.
You know, but what you then did as well is, and it wasn't, I mean, it's not even that recent anymore, right? We're talking 5, 6 years ago, 2017, 2018, was you didn't, this wasn't announced to the world until like last year, year before even.
Yeah.
But you then, I guess, took that next step in your journey, which was I'm contributing, going from I'm contributing my melodies, my kind of vocal patterns and my lyrics to I'm creating from scratch,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And that is essentially kind of going to probably take us up to the modern day, roughly, but Sicksense.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what's really interesting is that you've said before as well is how different this is
Yeah.
in its entirety
Mm-hmm.
to what the Agonist was doing, for the very simple reason that, as you've kind of said, why do the same thing twice?
Exactly. And it kind of happened at the perfect moment because the Agonist was going back to like a heavier direction. Like that was like the Orphans songwriting cycle, which was like really exciting for me, and I got to really experiment on a lot of different like themes and vocal styles. And then the opportunity for Sicksense kind of arose. And I was like I contemplated it for a second because it was so different. I didn't know how like my fans would take it. But then I was like, who cares? I like this. I think there's something good here. And it's drastically different from what I'm doing with the Agonist that it makes sense to me. I really don't get the people that are like in 2, 3, 4 different bands and they all sound the same. Like, I, unless like I guess you only love that one particular genre, but I grew up listening to all sorts of different things and I feel like I can find the beauty in pretty much everything. So if I can create music like that too, then like that makes me happy. And I think as musicians we have to make sure that we're happy first and foremost.
Yeah. I mean, to be blunt about, you don't only listen to progressive death metal. You know,
No.
I don't solely listen to whatever it is that I'm currently obsessed with, which is Sleep Token.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it does make more sense as a musician to be like, well, let me challenge myself. Let me go and do something that is. And I mean, what's really interesting about what you do with Sicksense is I'm not going to say that it's not thematically, sort of heavy. Heavy is the right word. It's not,
Mhm.
It's serious, I guess. Thematically, it can be quite serious, but sonically is a whole different ballgame. And I think
Yeah.
probably is a good point now to say that Sicksense is, so the Agonist was, I guess, probably termed as kind of progressive death metal, melodic death metal, kind of
Mhm.
went a lot around the place in a lot of genres,
Yeah.
but that was kind of the main, I guess, pin. And Sicksense are a new metal band.
Yeah. It has to fall under that umbrella because we need an umbrella, but it's not. It's it's very interesting because I just watched like a Tank the Tech did like a live reaction to our last single, and right before our interview I'm like I have to go check that out, and he made a point in his reaction with Sicksense that he's like I don't think this would have done well 20 years ago. And he was right because it's like we do have the new metal elements that like kind of spark that nostalgia for the people that grew up during that time. Like I'm one of those people. But then there's all these other modern metal elements, and sometimes it does get a little proggy that like would have turned off like the typical new metal fan back then. Um, like a good example is like the second I start singing. Like the people back then 20 years ago would be like, "What the fuck is a chick singing?" Like they would have rather had the same dude that's rapping sing in an off-key voice because that was the style. So,
Exactly. Yeah. That's a really interesting point, actually. Yeah. No,
yeah,
there's the nostalgia, sure. There's the
yeah,
bounce, the groove. There's,
yeah,
the rap flow that you both do,
yeah,
you know, but it is a modern take on the genre. It's looking at it through the lens of, well, what have we learned in the last 20 years?
yeah, yeah. And there's also like, I think everyone listens to music differently. When I listen to music, I can't help but listen to it as like a songwriter as well. And I listen to what's there, but I also listen to like what could be there. So every time that I listen to whether it's something I wrote or something a new band or something that I'm listening to for the first time, I sometimes have to separate the artist from the listener because my mind can hear all these things that like could be there in the future that could make it even better. And I think that that's not a curse at all. It's a blessing because like I have that with Sicksense and I have that with everything that I do that like if people are liking what we're doing right now with Sicksense, like I like maybe this is big words, but like I think you need big words as an artist. You need a vision. So it's like what is gonna come next is I'm hoping to like blow this like completely out of the ballpark. Like I don't ever want to be in a band where like our first songs that we write are our best songs. Like, what's the point? Like, it should always be better. Like, there's gonna be a part where you peak and like you're like, I made it, and maybe it's gonna be hard to recreate that magic from like 20 years ago. That's like what we're witnessing now with like the legacy bands, where it's like they just keep going, but they're never gonna quite create music like they did back in the
Hmm.
day. And that's fine. Cause like you can't be obsessed with that. I always have to be bigger and better, but you also can't just peak on your debut album or EP.
Yeah.
Like that's ridiculous.
Yeah. You can peak, a few albums in, right? And then
Hmm.
afterwards you can be like, well, that's cool,
Yeah.
as long as, I guess, maybe as long as you don't even have to recognize it, but I guess you're then at a point where you're making music that you're enjoying making,
Yeah. As
if
long
you
as,
yeah,
yeah, once you peak, I feel like you peak, okay, you're good, you have a fan base. All you have to do after that certain point is just keep putting out good music. It doesn't need to be mind blowing. Heck, some bands could even put out terrible music and still have a career from it, from those like few influential albums that they did back in the day. But for newer bands, I just think you need to put out something that's like on par sonically with what people love in your music, and it just has to be good enough. It doesn't need to be groundbreaking or mind-blowing, and you have to be good with it as an artist, of course. But I think sustaining a career isn't as hard as it is building it. I think the build is, and the growing is what's hardest.
for sure. And that's something that you're, I guess, going back to what you were saying before about the not necessarily it's a peak or trough, right? But you're kind of the growth, you're kind of going on an upward trajectory. One thing's had to stop,
Mm,
so there's a little bit of a setback where you no longer necessarily have that like guaranteed fan base, right?
yeah,
But now you're rebuilding and you're getting to do it on
yeah,
your terms.
yeah,
And I think what's exciting about that, and kind of probably the last sort of thing to touch on, is how you build that and how you sustain it.
yeah,
Because as you've right, you can't just build a career now, put one album out and have enough fans to sustain yourself.
yeah,
But what you've done for years, you've been a full-time musician for a very long time now, a good while, I think.
yeah.
And it's safe to say that that is your career.
Hmm.
But the way that you've done it is something that I guess people are starting to embrace more now. I think early on, I guess you sort of adopted the idea, the idea of sustaining yourself through Patreon,
Hmm.
or at least providing some level of stability.
Yeah,
And that was when actually you were doing covers
yeah,
predominantly,
yeah.
but you've changed that as well, I guess. That's evolved with you as well, hasn't it?
Well, and that's part of being in the music industry. You have to like kind of evolve with the times. Like things are always changing around you. And I think I was unhappy for a while because like while I loved what I was doing and being in the Agonist and the music I was creating, I was like you said the only person like full time with music, except I wasn't really making money off of it. So like I would find myself with like all this free time and no outlet to do something with it. And because the Agonist was never a full-time band, everyone has a job. We would tour maybe twice a year, so that's like 2 months out of the year. What about the other 10 months, and if we're writing an album that takes up maybe 3 months of the year, so what about the other 7 months, and I would just be antsy, and I'd feel like I have so much to give and no outlet for it. And I'm not the most like extroverted type to just like hit up people I don't know on the internet and be like, "Hey, let's do something together." I'm more like, I'm here doing my thing, you come to me. I've always been like that. Um and I was unhappy for a long time because I felt like I had so much to give and I didn't have an outlet on the one hand, and also I felt for like very underrated in that I still feel that way, but especially back then, in that I'm capable of so much and I do so much, and people don't even see it. They just see like the one or two singles that you put out, and that's it. They don't, not everyone's going to do a deep dive. Like, I literally just had someone like 2, 3 days ago that like just like a fan of mine that just saw like my Only for the Week cover, which is like my most successful cover ever. Like it has over 1 million streams on Spotify, and like, and he's like, that person was like, I had no idea you did this, and they're a fan of mine. You know what I mean? So like not everyone's going to do a deep dive to see like what you're about. So I felt like I had all this in me and this potential, and I'm like, I have the agonist and that's great, but like it's not giving me everything that I want. And I think when the pandemic happened, that was like a wake up call for me, because I would put off a lot of like endeavors thinking that like everything takes time. So I didn't want to start something and then, oh, I'm off for a tour or I'm off to record or whatever, and I have to put that on pause, put it on hold. So when the pandemic happened, I was like, well, I'm stuck at home for an indefinite period of time. It's now or never. And that kind of like kicked my butt into it and just said, like, look, just do it, you know? And I started with covers because covers were easy and it doesn't take really a lot out of you. And I saw that with every cover that I would put out, a lot of people were like, wow, I had no idea you could sing like this or that you could do this, because it's like they've only ever heard me in the Agonist. And it's like the Agonist does have some diversity, but it doesn't have everything. And that just, I guess, inspired me to go like one step further and like challenge myself even more and do more and more and more and more. And that quickly evolved into like, okay, I was doing Patreon, then I'm like, let's get into streaming, because like Twitch was being discussed a lot at the time. And like streaming's really good for me in the sense that it helps me deal with my overthinking, because my main problem as like an artist is like dealing with that perfectionist bug, where it's like, if it's not perfect, I'm not putting it out. But when you're streaming, you can't control that. Everything's
Yeah.
live in the moment, you know?
It's
So
tough,
it's like,
you know, if you have
yeah,
like, if you fluff one note, you
yeah.
can't stop and be like, shit, I got to redo my take.
Yeah. So that helped me deal with that like people just want to support and see you do your thing. They don't care if it's perfect or not. And it also opened my eyes to like how much people want to see the person behind the art and how important that is. Cause like I never thought I was like my life would be that fascinating, or like sharing parts of my life would interest people that much, because I up until that point was pretty private with my life. Um but seeing how that aspect of like opening up in that way has like helped other people and has helped kind of build a community where people with like mutual interests and like common sort of outlooks on life come together. It feels like you're creating something that's bigger than you know, and it's like I'm going to be a musician all my life, and my main goal is always going to be to create music. But the fact that I'm also responsible for this is kind of mind blowing, because it's like it gives you a sense of purpose that you didn't know you needed. And it keeps me sane and it holds me accountable. In that I never feel pressured. I genuinely like want to be there and I want to be active. But it helps me like not go into these dark places, because in the past I would go into a dark place, I would disappear from social media, I wouldn't post for 3 months, and I'd be like, ah, who cares anyways. But like now I know that people care, and I know that if I were to disappear, it would negatively impact a lot of people's lives. So it's just like it's a give and take, and it's like as much as like the community needs me, I need the community too. So yeah, it's turned into something I didn't even know I needed, I guess.
Yeah. And that, so it's kind of a quite a fascinating journey in a way, you know, in a lot of ways, because you've come from, I'm kind of good at singing. I'm going to work on it, to,
Yeah.
I need this to be perfect,
Yeah.
to
Eh.
defeat that,
Yeah.
particular gremlin. I'm actually just going to
Yeah.
sing it now. You know, I'm just going to perform it for these people who are actually invested in the art that you create
Yeah.
because of who you are as a musician, as a creative. They're like, they
Yeah.
might not have been a new metal fan, you know, they may not have been around even, which is a terrifying thought, for for, for the
Yeah.
first wave of new metal, and for
Yeah.
them to be like, now, well, we actually loved what you did then,
Yeah.
But hearing your voice on these covers and on this new original material is giving them something that you know, that giving that like a broadening their tastes.
Yeah.
It's yeah.
It's, you know what it boils down to? Like, this is a very general comment that I'm going to make right now, but I think when you start like getting into music and you want to create music, especially in heavier realms of like rock and metal music, it comes from a genuine place. I don't think anyone decides to be in a death metal band because of the money or the fame or the success, or like that's shooting yourself in the foot right there. So it comes from a genuine place. It always does. But then when you fall into this industry of like doing it professionally or semi-professionally and dealing with like record labels and booking agents and touring and managers and all that, you get to see a dark side of this that doesn't quite match that fairy tale that you've built in your head of like, I'm doing what I love. Because you're still doing what you love, but you have to deal with like all this other noise that you didn't know came along with it, but you have
Yeah.
to deal with it. And what ends up happening, I think, with a lot of musicians is that it messes with their head in a way where it makes them start thinking that they want things that they don't care for, that they never wanted. And like the biggest example I can think of, like for myself, like when I started singing in a way to like do it professionally, I didn't care to be like recognized as like one of the best singers in metal. I didn't care for that trophy or that award to like validate what I do. I just wanted to create music and share it with people and connect with people in the way that like my favorite bands and vocalists did at the time. But then you enter this industry where, being a woman in metal is, as many as there are right now, it's still a very small portion of the predominantly male um community. And you get all these like comparisons, and you get thrown into like, God forbid one person writes on a video, Vicky's like my favorite vocalist, then other people jump in and they're like, oh, but have you heard so and so? And then like it turns into this like competition, and then labels, and they kind of benefit with that because it gets people talking, and it's like all press is positive press. And it just starts making you think that like, I want to be recognized for my efforts, and I want to be known as like the best that ever was. And even if you deserve that title, it's kind of strange that you're suddenly wanting something that you never cared for to begin with.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot to just take a step back and be like, well, who fucking cares? Like, who cares that to some people's eyes I'm not the best? Like, and even if we look at it objectively, because like, what does it mean to be the best? Like, if you ask me who's the best vocalist of all time, like I could say like Mike Patton, objectively, because he just does so much with his voice. But someone else could turn around and say like, oh, well, hearing his voice does nothing for me. And
Right.
that's very legitimate, because in the end of the day, subjectivity is a very big part in it. And most people don't care, like when they make these comments, they don't care to like be accurate with their comments to this. So they don't care to say so and so has my favorite voice. They say like, this person is the best. And then people interject and they're like, no, they're not, because this and this. Like, because people don't talk about music objectively, they talk about it subjectively. And that's where the lines kind of get blurred, and that's where feelings start to get hurt. And I think a big thing for me, like the last few years, has just been like, well, so what? Who cares? Like, um, whether I get that title or not, it's not going to change anything in my life. And at the end of the day, I don't care about titles and trophies and awards. What I care about is creating music for the people, not for other musicians, not for music critics, not for, don't take this personally, but
It's like
like
I'm
people that
wounded.
have no, like people that are like in love with music, like a huge vinyl collection and this and that. Cause it's like, I love people like that, but you're a niche, you know what I mean? Most people that listen to music, they listen to it passively. They go to shows every now and then. They're normal everyday people,
Yeah.
and they're the ones that are supporting the music industry. The collectors and the people that like listen to music all day long because they can't picture their life without music, they're a very small group of people. And while I love them, and I think that it's amazing that they love music so much, they're not the ones that are like defining the music industry. Though it's kind of like when you look at like the classes, it's the middle class that's like supporting
Mm,
everything. So it's the same with it's the casual music listeners that are supporting this entire industry, and
it is. Yeah.
that's your target audience. So it's like that's when I woke up and I'm like, you know what? I want to make music for the people, because like that's who I was when I was young and I listened to some stuff for the first time. It was like MTV, and like Bring Me to Life came on and I saw Amy Lee in her nightgown about to fall off like the tower. I was like, you know, like and everyone has a story like that, how they got into music, and that's who I want to write music for.
Yeah. The people who, like you say, the people who love music, but it's a part of their life
Yeah.
because they are simply the biggest group of people, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And if I can get some of the passionate, you know, crazy about music people to also love what I do, that's great too. But I just feel too many musicians get caught up in trying to impress other musicians, impress music critics, because they're looking to be impressed. And I'm like, and I'm just sitting here, I'm like, I don't care to impress anyone at this point. I know what I do is good. I feel comfortable in what I do, and I just want to write music for people. That's all.
It's it's a long journey that's kind of summarized in one, really. It's like, I just want to do it for the people that are listening.
For the people,
Yeah,
yes.
I just want to do it for people for people. People will
Yeah,
listen, people will enjoy it,
yeah,
and people will always come back, you know? Like, if they like what you do, they'll be like,
yeah,
yeah, cool. We're going to
yeah.
listen to this again.
And it's important. I think more people need to, if anyone's watching this right now and you're a musician and you're also struggling with all these things, I think it's important to like just just let go and stop thinking that you want things that you never really cared for because other people make you think that you want them. It's like advertising almost, you know. Things you never even cared about, and then you see it on TV or on your phone and you're like, "Oh, this looks cool." And then you buy it and then you never use it. That's exactly what life is sometimes. People selling you things that you don't even care for, and it just ends up making you miserable at the end of the day. So it's really good to just go back to basics and like remember why you started doing what you did, what you started doing, because everyone's journey is different. So I'm not saying that my way is the way. My way is the way for me, but for someone else it might be something else. So it's really important to sit with your thoughts and self-reflect, but also don't self-reflect too much, because then you start thinking too much and that's also a bad thing. So
Sometimes you've just got to sing it and
yeah.
hope it turns out all right.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I really want to thank you for your time and thanks for coming on the podcast with me.
Yeah, this is great. This is what I like about podcasts. You never know how they're going to go.